When you're watching television, when you're listening to the news, remember this. Knowledge of the facts does not ensure understanding of what's going on. Knowledge of the facts does not ensure a true understanding of what's going on, and it certainly does not guarantee the wisdom to understand how to resolve a situation when necessary. Yesterday, I used a fictitious illustration involving two journalists in a concentration camp. And I was thinking last night, well, I shouldn't have done that. I should have just gone back to American history and used slavery as an illustration. If you want an entertaining, heartbreaking, on-point illustration of exactly what I'm talking about, read a book or two that has newspaper clippings that were in the South prior to the Civil War and newspaper clippings from the border states in the North, and then newspaper clippings from, say, Boston. All right? Because with the topic of slavery, you're going to have, in those newspaper clippings, journalists who are articulate, and the owners of those newspapers, because obviously we didn't have TV and radio in those days, but the owners of those newspapers were often men of stature. And if you looked at their oil painting on canvas, you'd see somebody that was handsome, had a dignified air about them, perhaps from a long lineage of slave-owning blue bloods. And you would look at them and you would look at their press and their operation, their newspaper and their distribution system and their reporters and their journalists who are writing these stories. And you would think, wow, these people are really smart. They have the facts, they have an understanding of what's going on, and they have the wisdom to show us what we should do to get out of whatever predicament that we're in. And you can see newspaper stories about William Lloyd Garrison, written in the South, where they print in the newspapers that there's a bounty on his head, offering $5,000 for him, dead or alive. William Lloyd Garrison, for those of you who don't know, was probably the loudest voice for abolition in the 1840s and 1850s, even earlier than that, really. A fun historical vignette. He had the privilege of meeting William Wilberforce. If you've seen the movie Amazing Grace, William Wilberforce was the British abolitionist who ultimately prevailed in making slavery illegal in England. William Lloyd Garrison had the privilege of fleeing to London to avoid being arrested by Southern spies and meeting William Wilberforce while he was there and getting Wilberforce's blessing. Fun story if you ever have the time and the desire to search it out. But anyway, you could see in these Southern newspapers a list of facts, okay? That there were slaves who wanted to be free, and that the owners of the slaves had a fear that the slaves might try to violently, with force, obtain their freedom, and that you had an agitator in the North, William Lloyd Garrison, who was printing seditious literature, calling for slaves to be freed immediately and without recompense, without money being given to the massa, and that the master, I apologize, they would have painted William Lloyd Garrison as a subversive, a dangerous threat to law and order, and that they wanted him, dead or alive, okay? In the North, you would see a very different explanation in certain newspapers about William Lloyd Garrison and other abolitionists. In fact, there was some areas of the country where you had newspapers that were abolitionist in their editorial position and some that were maintaining of the status quo in their position. So in a geographic area, you could have two newspapers that were colliding with one another. And oh my goodness, I wish I could remember his name. I'll get it if I can during the break, of a young Presbyterian minister who ran a newspaper that had an abolitionist bent. It was in a free state, but he ultimately was murdered. So it wasn't just that he had the knowledge of what was going on with slavery. It wasn't just that he was covering it, but because of his understanding, because of his wisdom, he was killed because of the position that he held. So when we watch what's going on with Brian Williams and whether Katie Couric wants his job and NBC's credibility being on the line, blah, blah, blah. Listen, most of them in the major media, most of them are in the hip pocket of the White House. They are Obama sycophants. They are not wise people. They are well-dressed, they have great makeup artists, and they are articulate. They can read a teleprompter really well, okay? But they're not wise. They are, biblically speaking, fools. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today.